Welcome to this third episode of Juicy Conversations with Julie. This episode is being recorded in honor of International Women's Day. So if you're listening to this on Monday the 8th, happy International Women's Day. For this episode, I wanted to obviously focus on women's rights, feminism, and sexism in our society, but I thought I'd shape it in the angle of women of color with 2020 and everything that's happened with the Black Lives Matter. We've seen a lot of conversations spark about race and about the place of people of color in society. So today I thought we'd focus on the place of women of color in society because trust me, it's not an easy ride. So just as a quick introduction to fit this kind of theme, I'm mixed race. I'm part French and part Cameroonian. I've also lived in India for a couple of years and I now live in the UK. I spent most of my life in France and I've never actually lived in Cameroon. I have 5 beautiful guests with me today. If you could all introduce yourselves quickly and then we'll get into the conversations.
Hi, I'm Atia. I'm 20 years old. I'm born and raised in England, but my family are from Bangladesh. But I've only been there once in my life.
Hi, I'm Lily. I'm half Senegalese and half French. I live a long time in France, but I live in Senegal as well. I work there, and I'm in England for 4 years now.
Hello, everyone. I'm Meryl. I'm a law student. I was born and brought up in the UK, but I'm from Central Asian heritage, and I'm a TEDx speaker and a poet.
Hey guys, it's Amelia. I'm 21 years old and I was born and raised in the UK, but my parents are both of Caribbean heritage. My mum's Jamaican and my dad's from Barbados. And I write, blog, and I've been on a few podcasts before. So yeah.
Hi everyone, I'm Demira, or nicknamed Demi. I'm 19 years old and yeah, I was born and raised here, but my mum's from Ethiopia and then my dad's from Guyana. And yeah, I'm a poet as well. So it's great to be here. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, guys. So to start us off, just a little bit of a general question. With feminism, which is the main theme, do you think feminism today is intersectional? And then second question, do you think it needs to be more intersectional if it's not enough, and why?
So firstly, I believe that it's on the way to being intersectional. However, I feel like based on the fact that it initially started off in favor for white women, like in the first wave of feminism, and it hasn't really done much to necessarily change. I would say, following on to the next question, yeah, I feel like it needs to be more intersectional and needs to be more inclusive of Black and brown women and trans women as well, because I still feel like feminism is heavily rooted somewhat in like transphobia and homophobia at times. And it's not very inclusive of people of color either. So I feel like we have a long way to go before all of us feel welcomed into the bracket of feminism.
Kind of like linking on from what Amelia said, I totally agree that feminism should be intersectional, just because I feel like your experience as a woman, it's not exclusive, it's shaped by your experience as like a woman of color, or what class you're from as well. If you're like raised in like a poorer environment, that also shapes your experience as a woman. So I feel like all of them are linked. And I think to exclude race from the conversation is just to exclude women of color from the conversation of feminism, and that's how it becomes such a like white orientated space.
In terms of intersectional feminism, I think that there are significant movements towards it becoming more intersectional, but I do think that we still have to get through, and talking from a woman of color from Central Asian heritage, I think that the kind of the torchbearers still have to really understand the dimensions of the cultures and the experiences of the women that they want to sort of incorporate into like the common stage. So I think until we understand the multi-dimensionality of the women, feminism in the mainstream has a very, very long way to go.
And I completely agree with what you say. Of course, we're talking about like race and everything today in feminism, but that is the big problem with feminism. It don't include everyone. It don't include every type of woman. we should include like prostitutes, sex worker, women who want to be at home and raise their kids, women who don't want to do that, women who want kids, women who want to wear the hijab, women who want to stay virgin. That is the problem of feminism today. Is really like a movement. It's a bit like LGBT sometimes. I put the both together. It's for white people, and white feminist is for straight white people. It's not really included all the other people who actually are more impacted by the problem. So yeah.
Should include all types of women, and not just to do with their cultures, but also their backgrounds and class. So sex workers and trans women or poor women, you know, like we all know that in the early days, feminism was really for middle class white women, upper class white women. And so we do still have a long way to go before everybody feels like they're included in this bracket of feminism. So yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to go back because I think the whole point of intersectionality, like that's what it's important about the concept of it. It's just like understanding that social issues and that exclusion is not as broad as we say it is. So sexism, of course, is a thing, but it's going to affect each and every one of us differently depending on the rest of our social identity. So when we talk about feminism, for example, we need to, first of all, not reduce it to just biological males oppressing biological women. It goes way further than that. But we also need to include debates of racism, debates of ableism, homophobia. It all comes under this one scope. And what's really important with intersectionality, I think, is that it's understanding that these are not all separate issues. Sometimes you can be a victim of all of them. Sometimes you can be a victim of none of them, just some of them, like most of us here. And it's just looking at the issues, yes, as a whole, but still looking at individuals as not as just one group that faces the same exact oppression, because I think that's what we're still getting a bit wrong in all those conversations.
I think that's so true. And I think it's interesting because I was talking to one of my Black girlfriends, and she was saying to me how, like, sometimes she doesn't feel like a woman, she just feels like a Black person. And I remember talking to her and I was like, that's really interesting, because I feel like when you don't take into account women of color, like there just becomes a thing. I think someone was saying like a box. It's like, you know, aren't I a woman? I'm quoting, you know, I'm quoting Sojourner Truth there, I think.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just think as well, like more Black feminists should be celebrated, because there are Black feminists, you know, like Audre Lorde, I'm really inspired by. And yeah, I think that when we don't take into account different voices when it comes to feminism, we're not gonna be united in any type of way. That shouldn't be exclusive. And I think that's something that the media lacks a lot. They always want to show one type of feminist. And yeah, I think, yeah, that's what I want to say on that.
I think, yeah, just going back on that, what's important to understand is there isn't such a thing as one type of feminist. I think we all fight the cause for ourselves and for each other. So obviously when I say I'm a feminist and when I say I want to fight for women's rights, it's not just me, and it's fighting for all women. And within myself, I know that, for example, I want to work more on fighting for the rights of women who have close to none, for example, in a lot of underdeveloped countries. But that fight comes from me and comes from my experience with sexism, my experience from being excluded from conversations that revolved around me. That also comes from the racism I've grown up feeling and the exclusion that I've witnessed. So I think, yeah, you can't describe feminism as one thing, because I think for all of us, it has become something so personal and so intimate, and the things that drive us will differ from one person to another.
And it's nice that you brought up like wanting change for women in developing countries, because there's definitely kind of Western feminism and the rest of the world kind of feminism. Mm-hmm. But I actually, this time last year for International Women's Day, I was because I was volunteering in Kenya last year, and we did an International Women's Day event in the community of Kibwezi. and there they faced a lot of issues with like gender-based violence and, you know, domestic issues, where a lot of the time a lot of the burden falls on the women to raise the kids and look after the kids, which can be mirrored really in our society as well, but it is a lot worse there. And yeah, it was really nice to be a part of that. So
yeah, it's a very rough. So basically, I think it's important the journey as well as a woman as color to become feminist. I mean, I'm a feminist for like 2 years now. Before that, I wasn't. And because I was so focused on being Black and even on my activism, I was so focused on how can I fix stuff in my own country, in Senegal, but in Africa. So I think what is very important is the journey and know with who we're talking with. The way we have the privilege today to be sit down and to talk like this about feminism, we can't abort that in the same way where we're going back in our country. I know that I was working in a program with women to give them more independence, to teach them how to grow vegetable and everything, but the way to abort feminism with them was completely different. We need to come back to basic. And this is where I get more frustrated. When I speak about women here in this society, in London, in France, is rare that I get frustrated. I get frustrated with men, but I think this is another subject that we need to talk about, how we include men and how we include Black men. I don't know about the Asian community, but Black men, we need to talk with them. But yeah, I think like where I get the most frustrating in my feminism is when I go back in Senegal and I got some cousin of my age telling me that men are on top of them because it's like that, or I saw some stuff, or just some of my frustration from out there. I think there is more work to do.
It's true that when you put the two together, that's when you realize that a lot of work needs to be done here. So whether that's in the UK, in Europe, in the West in general, but so much more work needs to be, well, maybe not so much more, but different work needs to be done in all those countries. Like I talk with my African grandmother, and the things that she says, she'll just be like, yeah, well, I did this one time and then my now ex-husband beat me for it. But she was like, well, I deserved it because I didn't do it this way and he's the boss. And the set of beliefs and the treatment and the place of women over there is so different from what it is here. And here there's already so much progress that needs to be made that it's interesting to see that when you include race or when you include any other aspect of your social identity in a set conversation, it completely changes the goals that you feel that you need to achieve for the movement.
I think that the reason why the inclusion of women of color and of ethnic cultures is so important in the feminist movement is that it gives perspective. I think that our experiences as women of color show the dire need and the reality of our lives. So for example, my dad is half Afghan, and so if you go on to Google and you type in Afghan women, well, you see women with their noses chopped off, or you have women who have been the subject of being burn victims or acid attack victims because they've wanted to go to school. And so again, like these conversations, it makes you realize that our voices are so important because it shows us the entirety of the female, what the woman requires emotionally, spiritually, sexually, and financially, all the other kind of ways. Another thing that I kind of wanted to mention is that when we became feminists, I think that there was a wonderful quote that I saw on Instagram from a Black movie, and it was about the time of segregation, and the Black woman said to the white man and said, "You have no other choice. You have a choice of whether to engage in politics or not. We have no choice." So we are living, breathing political statements just in our conception. And so when I kind of reflect back onto when I became a feminist, I don't think it ever was having become a feminist. I think, having been born in those circumstances, in those situations, I had no other choice but to be, protecting my mother, protecting myself, protecting the women around me. This constant kind of battle with the inherent kind of domestic patriarchy. That's something that was there, always. Whether we, became activists, into the open world, that's another thing. But I think as women, you may not know it, but I'm sure that, the women here have been feminists in their own home. And something else that, someone else mentioned, that their friend kind of feels like a Black person, not a Black female, or even as a female themselves. At the moment, I'm actually doing sort of feminine energy coaching sessions. And what I find really, really difficult is that the outer world, they see us as skin color first, and then gender, and then that kind of inherent femininity that, you know, that some women want to express, some don't. And so it's such a shame that we have to fight for our essences to be known so much. Whereas I think the white woman can very much be in her own skin and be accepted and kind of be comfortable in that. Whereas we have to shed so many layers so that people know our essence and we actually get to recognize our essences.
Yeah, I hope you guys don't mind me jumping in, but I just wanted to speak basically based off what Morale said as well about how feminism for a lot of us did start at home. And that was actually what I wanted to talk about before, which is so true. But mine was actually different in a way, because it wasn't me speaking more to the men of the house. It was more actually to the women and their mindsets, or women in my family and their mindsets too. And that's why I feel like, you know, intersectional feminism is very important, because I think a lot of women in the elder generations of Black and Asian or minority communities are very comfortable in the way that patriarchy dominates over women in their role in the family, at work, in their marriages, over their own bodies, like their own agency and stuff like that. And for me and because I have a twin sister, we were very vocal about our feminist ideologies from when we were quite young, because we had heard a lot of things from women in our family that was quite disturbing to us. You know, like views about how, you know, what you're wearing is something that might invite male attention and stuff like that, and all those type of things, like just basically really backward like mindsets. And we had to really like, you know, like break them down and like deconstruct it completely, like destabilize it entirely, because we were not comfortable growing up in a house that was resistant to us expressing ourselves, because of fear of what men shouldn't be doing, basically. And of course it's dangerous and stuff like that, and we have to take care of ourselves, but I don't think I should have to take care of myself in a way that stops me from being who I am, because of the fact that men just have way more power to do what they want to do without repercussions. Do you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And so that was something that I was having conversations with my mum about for a really long time. And over the time, her mindset has completely changed, like to the point where, like, if we're talking in front of other people in the family, she is quick to correct herself or to correct others too. And I feel like had we not, of a younger generation, done that and been vocal about that, and even, you know, hadn't been met with resistance and, you know, criticism by what we're saying, my mum wouldn't be where she is right now in terms of her mindset. And I think that's why it's so important that we continue this kind of push for intersectionality as well in terms of feminism, because we're then removing all the things that we've had to learn or that's been taught to us in terms of like older generations, and we're now unlearning that and kind of relearning how to be like women and free and you know, like autonomous and stuff like that, without the constraints of like patriarchy and without the constraints of like family pressures as well.
Mm-hmm.
So
I think that's essentially the whole point, I think, of this episode. Is what I kind of want to broadcast is what the feminist fight, or what just the fight for equality looks like for women of color. Because that's the thing, is sexism within our communities is so different than the sexism that is being portrayed in the West, which is mainly white focused. And I think, yeah, that's exactly the topic. How does our fight differ from the mainstream media fight, or differ from a white woman's fight for equality? If you guys have anything to add on that.
I was gonna just like kind of leading on from what Meryl and Amelia said. I feel like for white women, obviously not every single white woman, but I feel like for most of them, they see the fight, or they're exposed to it when they go outside, and it's like at the workplace or school. Whereas I feel like for a lot of women of color, it starts from home. And like how Amelia said, and even Meryl, like we've had to be activists in our own household first to kind of fight the levels of sexism within our own households, and then we've also become exposed to it outside. So like in my own household, I'm the only girl and I have 3 older brothers, so a lot of the time I'm having to kind of fight for my place as an equal in the household, because I get told a lot of things about, you know, I'm supposed to be like the perfect housewife when I grow up. I should learn how to cook because what am I going to do when I go to my in-laws' house? And it's just like having to fight those things in your own household, but then also having to fight it outside. And I also feel like because my parents are immigrants, there's almost this clash with the culture they were raised with versus like the environment I'm currently living in the UK. And like there's almost a dissonance where I'm seeing like feminism and this is what life could be like for women, whereas at home it's not like that. So it's kind of like this really weird space.
I think my journey is a bit different because I've been the one who perpetrated. Well, that is a hard word. Patriarchy. I grew up in a foster care, and I grew up in the ends, the wood, the real one, and I grew up with guys, and I was one of the guy. I was not the girl. I was really with them. So I grew up in a way to shame a girl who's gonna have sex too much, or maybe don't, but she's just everyone said that. I've been the one to make the same jokes to. I've been the one to look at them and showing video of what they was doing. Not that I was watching the video, but it never like going to my mind. I really like I was one of the one who perpetrated that. And now when I go back and I have conversation with them, I can see like there is a big wall between us. But I think there is a lot of girls like me who grew up teenager, especially like in the poor area where I grew up, the way is very cultural and really like what the other one's gonna say. And even the parents start to do, the parents are always very careful of what's gonna happen, what people are gonna say. In my environment where I grew up, no one is feminist. It's something that you can't go because like it's too much. It's too much to try to explain us because is the woman have no place. The only little place that she can have, she really need to go into the stereotype. If you go out of that, it's not working. And I saw somebody like household or mom do that. My girl's friend, they have to take care of the little brother and everyone in the house, but the brother, they don't do anything. And when I talk with some girls here from my age, I mean, I'm 28, from my age here in London, they has to do the same with the little brother. So I think some household, they're lucky enough to be able to can teach to the parents feminism. They're smart enough, they have the privilege enough, some whatever, to be able to do that. But in a lot of household, is impossible. You can be loud about your feminist out, but you can't go try to explain to your mom that it shouldn't be like that. And that is a problem as well, because I think that there is a lot of people they can't talk inside their house. The conversation is not open, is impossible. And so I understand what you say, Atia, is that is really tricky, these two culture, but that's going with diaspora as well, because our parents came from a way they weren't integrated, and we are born here, so we don't need to integrate it, so we don't have to be quiet like them. But I can understand it's tricky to be like, okay, out I can do that, but at home, and I think it's even more tricky for the people they can't open they can't talk.
In just to add on to everyone's really thought-provoking points, in terms of how I guess my experience or my fight is perhaps different to the sort of the mainstream fight, is that now, especially going into therapy, these things are sort of coming into clear sort of diamond-esque view. I find myself fighting generational trauma from colonization, which began with oppressing and sort of destructing the spiritual backbone of the civilizations that I'm from. And so that I feel myself that I'm fighting very much against a body and a mind and a soul that has been reduced. So that is the first layer. The second layer is I think the point was made that women very much are the gatekeepers of the patriarchy that they are the subject of. And so being around that certain kind of female identity or certain female kind of energy fields in my own family, we have, either very shouty women who are very angry at the world and women who have internalized, that kind of abuse and that kind of patriarchy. And so the fact that it's such an inward psychological struggle, I feel as if my battle, as someone who, wants equality between the sexes and wants a space in this world that is equal and is, of dignity, I feel as if I'm fighting for and on behalf of all the women that came before me, especially from my father's side, having seen the impact of war and displacement, and rape and famine and bludgeoning and all of those kind of things that have happened with almost more than 100 years of war in Afghanistan. I've seen the impact that has had on gender in general. And so if you look at it from like a historical perspective, we're not just dealing with racism right now, we're dealing with decades, if not hundreds of years of colonization and what that has done to the female psyche. So I think that we've got to say it as it is, talk about it to the extent that it is, and identify that our struggle is a struggle that is on behalf of all the women that came before us and the women that will come, from us and our daughters. And so I think it's, an internal revolution, and that is how strong of a struggle it is.
It's just like you said, Meryl, like we have to deal with our trauma and like our ancestors' trauma before, like we have to deal with their trauma before we can even get to our own.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's the same with white people. I don't think they have that history of trauma that they have to like reap through. Whereas we have to like sit in therapy and go through all of these traumas of people like who aren't even us. And then we get to us. And then it's like, where do we start?
Yeah, it's a mountain, isn't it? It's just such a high mountain, but we'll get there for sure.
Exactly.
This is the best way. Like, I think this is what the reason that every activist is thinking for the next generation. What's going to happen for them? Because like, even me, sometimes I think about just even people at 20 today. Like, I'm tired to like see, like, I was upset. I was already pissed when I was 20, and I'm tired, and I don't want that kids around like this one. Can like, this is the good way to think. How we do for our kids are not going in the same pattern, because basically what we need to break is a pattern today. How we do for I don't want my kid to be an activist for that. I want my kids to be an activist for something else, for the planet maybe. We should, if we had time for that, it would be better. But you know what I mean? So it's a very good way to think.
Yeah, I really like what you said, like I actually think it's so true. Like I don't want us to have to be fighting the same battles, or our children, sorry, to have to fight the same battles. I want us to have progressed to a point where we're not, our children are not having to parent themselves and like heal from us and heal from the things that we didn't do before them. And it's a big task to bear, because obviously, like Atia and Miral said, we've had to unlearn everything that our parents have done and basically like deal with generational trauma, which is tough. But then again, because of how much we know now, I think I'm almost optimistic about the fact that our children probably will not have to like face the same things. And even if they do, they're at least in a household that is safe, that protects them, that teaches them about themselves in a different type of way, and allows for their individuality and like conversations about their race and gender and whatever to be very open. I think that's really important. So yeah, I just want to say that I like what you said.
Yeah, I think just going back on the trauma element of it, I think that's where the main difference probably lies, is that for people who are considered to be the norm, they don't have the trauma of being so used to not being the norm. And I think that's where the main difference lies, as we've all said, is that we come from families and from communities that have so much trauma to get through and to deal with, which makes it so much harder to fight for these causes, because we're now having to deal with trauma that we don't understand, and we're now facing the consequences of things that we don't really get. Like, I feel like I've understood so much about where racism comes from and why things like colorism exist and why sexism comes from, and where cultural appropriation comes from through history. But it's also led me to think, like, why is this my battle to fight? Why is it that now, for example, women of different skin colors are treated differently? And why is light skin privilege a thing? Because back in colonial times, white men decided that there would be a difference between darker women and lighter women. And that is the very, very important thing, is that it stems from so far back. And the thing is, like, I think that these are all topics that I know make me very emotional, and like the trauma that I've faced is none compared to the traumas that all my ancestors would have faced. But it's just like, how are we still at this point of having to deal with the consequences of stuff that happens literally thousands of years ago. Well, hundreds of years ago. Yeah, go ahead, Amelia.
I was just going to say, like you mentioned something about colorism, and obviously, like as a dark skinned like woman, it's tough because obviously this is something that like I've experienced virtually all my life, and it's one of those things where it's just like it's so violent in the sense that it's so dismissed. We're completely disregarded in that sense. Like our experiences, I mean, I was at school and my experiences were denied. People told me that didn't happen. People aren't colorist, this and that. Like they started talking about my levels of desirability, which is literally counterproductive. Like it's literally like, you know, you're saying exactly what I meant, and stuff like that. And it's also just the fact that like, because of how far back it dates, it's like, it's almost embarrassing that we're still dealing with the same type of things. But I think the reason that we are is that it's no longer a white issue. Like it was definitely started by white people to divide us as, you know, in races. And it's not even just, like prevalent in the Black community, it's in the Asian community too. But I feel like it's just a thing where now, you know, the Black men, for example, in my community have actually adapted to colorist mindsets as well. So we're now being oppressed by our own. And then there's also Black women who are kind of comfortable in the fact that their fairer skin tone actually puts them a bit above the rest. And so they too perpetuate colorist ideologies as well. In the family structures, colorism is something that is like noticeable. Like I know that in some of my friends' families, they've like expressed that like, you know, the lighter skinned cousins and whatever were always treated nicer, got nicer presents and stuff like that. And the darker skins were always like, you know, critiqued more, criticized on their behavior. And that was something that for me, like navigating through that like during school, I mean, I literally have counseling for it because it was like that traumatic. So it affected my romantic relationships, my friendship groups as well, which is not really spoken about.
Yeah.
I'm really going on a tangent right now, so I'll stop. But yeah, like you guys get the picture. Like it was a lot, basically. And I can only hope that within the feminist spectrum as well, we're able to actually talk about that as well. And like,
it's not done enough, but it's being done a bit more. Like colorism, yeah. I think we got more and more like skin or checking their privilege or understanding, because it's unlearning a deconstruction. It took me a while and other stuff. But I think this conversation is one of the stuff or the conversation I think in our community between women are more open. Now, again, we need to include men, especially in London. I know how rough it can be to be a dark-skinned woman because men are very, very mean to dark-skinned women and Black men in the community. I know I experiment that, like even going out with two friends of mine, both of them are dark-skinned, but people come talk to me just because, you know, I'm the light skin in the middle. So I know colorism in London is a bit hot, but I think between the women community, in the Black women community, actually, I heard more and I see more and more light skin girl as well, being quiet and listen and doing the deconstruction. So that's good.
I think, yeah, there's a thing, like the thing with colorism is it makes no sense because, for example, what I've suffered from, and I've realized that it's nothing because I'm still in a position of privilege due to my light skin. But I think what I've suffered from is I wasn't Black enough for a lot of people. So people don't understand how traumatic it is. First of all, that our skin color and our heritage is literally brought down to physical features and to sexual features, which it's not. But also being compared to people that, yes, are part of our community, but it's not because I have African heritage that you can compare me to, for example, a Congolese Black woman. I am a Cameroonian mixed race woman. We're just not the same person. And it is extremely traumatic in both ways, but it also doesn't make sense at all. Like I remember my sister, when she was younger, got bullied by this one girl, and she one day told her, I used to be in the same school, so she knew me. She was like, yeah, you're not a real mixed race girl because mixed race girls are pretty. Look at your sister, look at you. And one, I was like, how dare you compare both of us? And two, like, so what does this mean that mixed race girl, you associate mixed race to pretty, which means not only you associate dark to ugly, but also that you're sexualizing and disrespecting us so much. And I think to come back to what Lily said as well, men highly contribute to that. And that's both white men and Black men. So many white men on Tinder in real life have come to me and said like, oh, I love Black girls or I love darker girls. One, I'm not Black, just to get that straight. Two, what makes you think it's okay to say this? And as you were saying, Amelia, it is something, colorism, that will affect you in every aspect of your life, whether it's your romantic life, personal life. You end up feeling bad or feeling angry at people from your own community because you're discriminated against because of the way they look. And black men do that loads as well. Loads of black men don't want to date black women. Loads of black men date a white girl and it's like token and they're so proud of it. And I think across the spectrum, whether it's black or white men, they hold mixed race women to such a on such a over sexualized pedestal, and it's really, really damaging not only to us but to our darker sisters. That's who it's most damaging to.
Yeah, if I could kind of continue what Julie was saying, I think for me, like I definitely think just as with white privilege and dismantling that should be the burden of white people, it is on light-skinned people to try and dismantle light-skinned privilege, because I feel like not enough of us are talking about it. I feel like it's always the burden of, I mostly hear it from like darker skinned women who are making very valid cases, very intellectual cases on why there's this disparity. But then I feel like certain light-skinned people just feel uncomfortable and it'll be like, oh, you know, well, we're all black or whatever. And it's like, that's not what they're saying. That's, you know, that's not what's going on here. And I think that, like what was said, it is a remnant of colonialism. It's, you know, it was done as a way to divide black people. And, you know, because that's just a way of like divide and rule. When you divide people, you get to rule. Just as with feminism, like we're talking now, when we have this divide now between women of color and white women, or dark skins and light skins, you just divide the movement, and because they know we're stronger together. And yeah, I feel as though when people can get too comfortable with the privilege that they have. So none of us are in the 1%. None of us are a rich white cis male who's a billionaire, basically Jeff Bezos. None of us are in that 1%, but no one wants to let go of what little privilege they have. So say as a light skin, I could just turn around and be like, oh, well, at least I'm not dark skin. Or if I'm like a white gay man, I could be like, okay, well, at least I'm not a black gay man. I think that's a very big issue where people are not willing to let go of what little privilege they have for the greater movement. Yeah, thank you.
I was just going to add on from what Amelia was saying before, from a South Asian perspective on colorism, and it exists so much in our community as well, but it kind of works in a different way. I feel like in the Black community, dark-skinned women have like characteristics associated with them, and I don't necessarily think that's how it works in our community in South Asia, but rather it's extremely linked to desirability, and dark skin is seen as something that's undesirable. I remember when I was 15, I had someone tell me that I was too dark to get married. And it's this idea of like, yeah, I know, I was 15 and someone told me that and they thought it was okay. And I was just like, first of all, no 15-year-old should have to hear that. Second of all, dark skin, I wouldn't even say like objectively I am darker than other women, but the fact that my skin was even seen as dark, it just shows this problem we have. Like, why is there a such thing as too dark? Like, we never hear a too light, you know? Why is there like, why can women just not exist? Like, why do we have to have this cap on how dark we can be?
Yeah, so I just to sort of, I mentioned Central Asian. My mum is of Turkish heritage, my dad's Afghan, Uzbek. And so the South Asian, Central Asian, Eurasian, it kind of, they all have different crevices of, you know, colorism. So this is again kind of sort of, it's going to bring back very sort of painful memories, but I remember, and I'm going to say it, I want to I hope they're listening, and I hope they realize the impact that they had on me. But from my maternal side, so, Turkish women are characterized by very light skin, green eyes, sort of that kind of, desirable. I remember my maternal aunt would line me up with the rest of my whiter cousins and make me hold out my hand at like 7 or 8 years old. There's a bit of a lump in my throat as I say this, because this was difficult to sort of, experience. And she would, rank us from whitest to darkest. And I remember they were more kind of petite framed, and I'm a little bit more kind of bulky and more curvaceous. And I remember the way that I was, approached, and the way that I was treated in the family compared to them. So not to ever take away from the gravity of what Black women face and mixed race women face, but it works very, very similarly in our culture, that it's not just about your skin tone, but it's about the shape of your body. If you are more curvaceous, that means you're more promiscuous, and therefore your mother should be a little bit more careful about what you do and where you go. If you're a confident woman and you're sort of dark, I was considered to be dark, then you're not really very trustworthy, and you should act more feminine to prove to the women and also to the men that you're actually, a female. So growing up, I actually had significant sort of difficulties with figuring myself out as, am I really a woman, or am I actually sort of a man? And it got to that extent. So for those women who are curvaceous, who are bulky, who are darker, who have stronger voices, and who are intelligent, that came as a no-go if you were dark. But if you were light-skinned, or if you were white and you had all of those things, that was great. That was actually something that they encouraged. And so there is this kind of lottery formula that has been perpetuated by the turban headmen of old, that has now been kind of internalized by the females. And not only does that kind of work its way into domestics and obviously your self-identity, but that's something that when I try to get into relationships and, consider people for marriage, they sexualized me because I was curvy and because I have, a darker skin tone. They had an internal respect for women who were petite and for taller, lighter women. So not only does, being dark skinned make you less favorable, but it also demonizes you, and it makes you a force of kind of, isolation and neglect as well. And then growing up in Brighton and being the only kind of petite, curvy, darker skinned girl in a school full of white people, with white girls who, would dress very openly, very pretty, very light skin, that kind of like Rapunzel hair. That was sort of like a double blow. So not only was it, you're not feminine enough for us, you're not feminine enough for them. Because I remember white boys would be like, I don't really go for brown girls. And I remember having all these crushes on these white boys, because obviously, there was really no other choice. And for them to be like, for them to almost laugh or be disgusted at the fact that they could even like, a brown girl, unless she was basically a coconut, where she just emulated everything that was to do with white culture, and then you could be considered. So the whole concept of performance, well, I think I've been like a lifelong kind of stage theatre actress then, I guess.
Essentially, that is exactly the message that we're trying to put out. Like, that's exactly the point of this all, is that this is the struggles of women of color. We don't only face sexism, we also face racism, which a lot of people face only one of the two. And also we face it at home and outside. So it's within our own cultures, and then it's within the cultures that surround us as well. And I think we all have very different experiences going about our heritage and our skin colors, but it all comes down to the same thing, where it was just hard to be happy and to accept yourself and to understand your heritage and to embrace it when no one really does. Then we were talking about trauma. Not only do we have to live with the trauma of our parents and of our history, but we also have to deal with our own traumas, or of people either from our own community just having so much internalized racism within them that they kind of project their insecurities onto us, or having to deal with the trauma of the racist societies that we were all brought up in, because we all grew up in the West. So we kind of all grew up, I think we can all agree, like we all grew up within communities and within nations that never fully accepted us, really. And I think that's what makes being a woman of color much harder than just being a person of color, or much harder than just being a woman. There's, as you said, Meryl, layers to our suffering, if I can say, and layers to our struggles.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, like, this idea of colorism, while it does affect men, I feel like it affects women much more, because we face colorism from everyone. We face it from the men in our own community, and then from like non-members of our community. We face it, you know, on a wider level. Whereas with men, I feel like they don't necessarily face it as much with their own communities, at least from what I could see anyway. And yeah, just like going on from what Meryl said, it is just like you have to perform a role of like this subservient, you know, perfect almost marriage candidate in our cultures.
Yeah, I think if I want to add to that as well, like, there are so many dark-skinned, beautiful women out there. And, you know, when we use like when we equate light skin with pretty, it's just so toxic and so harmful. And I was watching like an interview with Lupita Nyong'o when she was talking about, you know, praying every day to be lighter, which is, I was just like, what? You're so beautiful. How did you ever feel that way? But, you know, it's something that I haven't had to worry about, you know, and I think that it's really important that, and she's releasing a book, you know, that talks about colorism, and a young dark-skinned girl coming into her own and feeling more comfortable with herself. And I think that is so powerful for the next generation of young girls, because, you know, say I have a daughter, I don't know what she's going to look like. She could either be dark skin or light skin, whatever she may turn out to be. I think it's very important to, like, as Julie was saying, for there to be representatives of different colors, different creeds, you know. And I think it's very interesting actually to hear from you, Atia, and Miral's perspectives on what it's like with your own communities, because it's something that I wasn't necessarily fully aware of, and just the stress. I think that I can relate to the stress it is of looks being everything for a woman, and I really hate that, but it's just the world we're living in, where it's what you look like. And I think to not be misunderstood, some people will then go, oh yeah, looks aren't everything, when say we're saying this kind of thing and complaining about what's seen as desirable. And it's like, well, no, looks are everything in this society. It would be great if we lived in a society where looks aren't everything, but sadly that's what people will decide first when they meet you, before they even get to know you. And I just wanted to add that in there. But yeah.
I think, yeah, just going back on the looks isn't everything. I mean, I think in all women, probably, and a lot of men to be fair, but probably all women in this world really wish that it didn't come down to looks, because realistically, that's like the first thing when it comes to a woman. How desirable is she? Like, we can all feel it. We've all felt the looks. We've all felt the unwanted hands. We've all felt a lot of things that we shouldn't be feeling just from being women. And it's not to say that it doesn't happen to men. Of course not. But that is just to say that you can ask pretty much any woman in this world and she'll have some testimony about how she has felt like she was reduced to a sexual being. And I think that's the whole thing. But it comes back to what we were saying beforehand. When people talk about my blackness or my heritage, it comes down to my skin color. It comes down to the texture of my hair. I'm Cameroonian. There's a whole identity to my being, and all you're reducing it to is how tanned I am. And that's really is all that it's reduced to, whether it's by men or by women. Because women as well, when we look at like blackfishing, for example, that's what the Kardashian Jenner clan have done. That's what so many people have done, is they take physical features from a community, appropriate it, to then sexualize it. Then the whole African community is reduced to those beauty standards. The whole Asian community, Middle Eastern communities, Latina community, and any community that has been marginalized, we are reduced to a beauty standard. So if you don't want me to say that it comes down to looks, stop making me feel like my entire being, my entire heritage, my entire identity comes down to looks, and then I'll stop calling you out for it. Like that's the conclusion of it all. And that's something that everyone perpetrates. White women, white men, black women, black men, we all do it, and we all need to stop.
It's so true, like stop reducing us down to our looks. That should be a quote in itself.
Yeah, I was just going to say that obviously I can't relate to people wanting to touch my hair, first of all, because I don't show it. And second of all, I think even if I did, I don't have black hair, so people don't have that curiosity towards my hair that they would for black hair. But I can relate to, like, in a similar sense with my hijab, and like people wanting to like touch it, or like people associating stereotypes and kind of imposing them onto me. So like I've had people ask me if I was going to get a forced marriage, and I just, first of all, I'm like, why would you even ever think that's an okay question to ask someone? And second of all, there's a lot of trauma with like forced marriage, that even just bringing it up, you don't know what kind of trauma you're bringing up in the person. But it kind of like links back to like this idea of people almost feeling entitled to kind of like probe you, whether it's your looks and your hair, or whether it's your hijab and like the stereotypes associated with your community, whether it's as a South Asian woman or as a Muslim woman. They almost feel like entitled to, I don't know, like put you on the spotlight and interrogate you as if that's normal. But when I meet white people, I won't put them on the spotlight and start interrogating them, like, why are you like this? Why do you have freckles? Like, I don't do that. So it's like, why do they feel the need to do it to us?
And just to go back on that as well, because then some people might think like, yeah, but this is a problem that men face as well. I mean, all the men that are listening to this, if it's happened to any of you, like, please feel free to correct me. But I have never heard in my 22 years of existence about a white person asking a man of color if they're getting a forced marriage. Like, that's the thing, is all that we're denouncing is, of course, things that happen to everyone across the globe. But the point is that a woman of color's experience with life and with hardship is so singular, because we have to face everything that marginalized communities have to face, and more, because we've got two aspects. That means that we're marginalized, and that's what's just so crazy.
I think the key issue that I'm kind of picking up on, and something that I kind of realized today, was the general entitlement, and I've seen it in my culture as well. My brother and my father, their lives are not really intruded into. But with me, when I, for example, started wearing the hijab, I got more females asking me why I'm wearing the hijab than if a man decided to become religious one day and change his whole attire. If anything, he would have been considered to be the pure kind of, ideal kind of husband or partner or ideal friend or however. Whereas with women in general, I think that we have a sense of entitlement, and we have almost like, with men, I feel, maybe, I don't know what it is, but I feel like with men, we don't try to press those buttons. We don't try to overstep those boundaries. But I think with women in general, you have people on the street place some sort of opinion onto you. You have people that you've never really met before ask you very intrusive personal questions. And I think that when you're even more, if you're kind of membership to a lot of vulnerable groups, being an ethnic minority, being a woman, if you are from the LGBTQ community, that places you into even more of line of fire. So I think just in general, being a woman of color, we've had a lot of our boundaries overstepped. We've had a lot of interrogation, a lot of intrusiveness. And I think something I really want to say, since I'm kind of going into therapy and all of that, that it takes a long time to realize, and it is a very painful awakening experience. So really my point is that the more realizations we have, the better, the more painful it is. But if we don't have these realizations now, we're really doing ourselves a huge disservice.
I think, Julie, you mentioned it, but I feel like why it happens to women of colour so much is because we just don't have respect in society. Like, we just don't have that respect. I feel like we're always objectified, and like once you place someone as an object, you're not going to respect them as a human being. You're going to you're not even going to respect them. You're going to treat them like an object, which is why I feel like people, non-women of color, feel like they can ask us intrusive questions, that they can just touch us, whether it's your hair or like our hijabs, whatever it may be. They feel like they can just touch it, and like their curiosity is a good enough reason to do all those things because they're just curious and they want to know.
That's such a true point. And I think that I was just thinking about it now. So with Harvey Weinstein's case, he only responded to Salma Hayek and Lupita Nyong'o's harassment claims because, and Salma Hayek, sorry if I'm saying her name wrong, wrote, Hayek, sorry. She wrote in her in an article of how he was trying to discredit them because women of color are the easiest to discredit when it comes to claims of sexual assault. And it's just crazy how we're all human and we're seen as less. It's not okay. And yeah.
I think, yeah, that's the main issue is following up on what you all said, and I think then we'll start to round up a little bit. That is the issue, is that we're all human, but we're not seen the same. I don't know if it's nobody respects us, nobody values us, but we're definitely valued and differently. People don't have the same boundaries when it comes to us. People are quite intrusive, and that is the thing, is people hide behind curiosity that sometimes is not welcome. Like, of course, I don't want you to completely ignore the fact that I am partly African, but that doesn't mean that you should go out of your way to remind me all the time and make me feel excluded, because I am, yes, African, but I'm also European. So the fact that you only acknowledge one side of my heritage when you want to is a problem. And the fact that people, I feel like an issue when you're a woman and when you're a person of color, and therefore when you're a woman of color, is you have to have a lot of patience, a lot of self-derision. It's just not okay, but because you're a person of color, a woman of color, you're expected to just kind of roll with it. And if you don't, well, you're problematic or you're too sensitive. And it's just, I think that's the real issue. It's not so much that people don't value us or don't care. It's just that the level of respect that they have for us is not the level of respect that they'd expect in return. And that is, again, due to history, because we've been silenced and we have been inferior. Just in terms of socially and economically, we've been inferior for so long that people don't have that same political correctness, maybe awareness, and that same care when it comes to us, because we're just expected to be so used to it. And I think that was going to be my last question, kind of this topic, is I hear a lot of like, yeah, you're playing the victim, you're being too oversensitive. Why don't you try and detach yourself from the problem? Don't take things so personally. Why would you guys say, in maybe like a minute or something, why do we need to keep complaining, and why are we not playing the victims and just being oversensitive about all these issues, in your opinions?
I think that in itself is a form of gaslighting, to say that you're playing the victim, that you're being, sensitive, and it gets me very angry. I think the reason why I kind of suppressed it for so long is because I did not know any better, right? And so I don't think there is no victimization here. There is no falseness of narrative. There is no, emotionalization, if that's a word, or anything like that. I think that as women, even, white feminists, to sort of give credit to where credit is due, they really had a tough time speaking their narrative against white men, at the beginning of the first age of feminism. But I think for us, the reason why it's difficult for us to voice our voices to begin with, is because it's been so internalized. And in terms of the idea of victimhood and, you know, being over emotional and everything, there is great power in saying things as it is. We have to be explicit, we have to be honest, and none of us should give a damn whether we're crying about it, whether we're not. We're talking about trauma, we're talking about abuse, we're talking about multi-dimensional like suppression and reduction of the human spirit. This is stuff that is not easy, and it's very heavy.
I don't think we should ever feel bad about coming out and saying that we don't feel happy, or we feel offended by something someone said or have done, especially like in our friendship groups. I feel like that's where it happens a lot, and it goes unspoken for. I feel like we as women of color should find the confidence to call people out, because at the end of the day, whether, like, for example, if I don't call my friend out, she can live her life happily ever after, but then I'm still thinking about what she said or done, and if it affects me. So I think for our own sake, we should call people out for what they do.
Yeah, I just want to say it's been really wonderful to be here with you all. I'm really grateful for each of your experiences and wild views. Like, I love these kinds of conversations because it always changes me at the end in some way, changes perspective on things. And yeah, that's really all I have to say. I'm so grateful for this space, and yeah, thank you all.
Yeah, same. I think there's all these conversations are so inspiring, and that's why we need to keep having them. And I keep repeating it, but it's just because coming from someone who's felt quite oppressed and who's felt like she couldn't say what she wanted to say for so many years, I feel like it's important to remember it. Like, we're not diminishing any other people's pains, and we're not saying that whoever you are, whoever you identify as, you've not gone through any trauma or any pain. That's not the point. It's just we're saying right now we're choosing to focus on this, and we're going to tell you every way that the treatment of women of color in society today is wrong. There are a lot of other issues that need to be discussed when it comes to racism and sexism. We don't have time to discuss them all in like an hour Zoom, but those are conversations that we can keep having. But yeah, the message is not like, yeah, we feel oppressed, so now we're going to oppress you. The message is we're done. We don't want to be silenced anymore. We're definitely nobody's having those conversations for us, so we're going to start having them. And then if we can include other people who feel oppressed in different ways, that is the end goal. The end goal would be for everyone to just be happy and live the life that they want to live. But until we can get even our truth heard and start to change things from ourselves, because that's where we can really change things from what we've experienced, we will not be quiet.
Yeah. I really love that, Julie. I think that one thing that drives this cancer of oppression is us taking it, our endurance, our tolerance. So to everyone who's watching this, you better drop that tolerance. You know, how many of us validate ourselves? How many of us begin that internal healing process that means that, you know, and honestly, we think that this is an impossible task. But once you start to heal yourself, once you start to understand what boundaries are, once you understand your self-worth, all of these kind of things, people have no other choice but to respond to that change in energy. And that is probably the most revolutionary, self-healing, other healing thing that you can do. When you heal yourself, people have no other choice but to respond to you differently.
Yeah, I think definitely as a conclusion, it's the conclusion to most conversations. The goal is, well, not the goal, but the priority is just take care of ourselves, take care of each other, continue to have these conversations, and continue to include whoever feels that they need to be included in the conversations. And yeah, eventually we'll get there. Like, this is a good start. I'm always so emotional and inspired by all those conversations I have, but yeah, we just have to keep fighting and make sure that we keep fighting in a way that is healthy and that is loving and that is putting our health and our well-being first. I think those will be my concluding words. Thank you very much for being on. Thank you to anyone who's listened this far, and I'll see you guys very soon.